Welcome back to TestLab. My name's Dr. Watt, here to be your guide in grow lighting. Now that we've gotten through single-ended technology, we're going to be moving on to the newer lighting technologies, beginning with the current favourite in the commercial space, double-ended high-pressure sodium, with today's test concentrating on the single one-piece greenhouse-style fixtures. Now, if you're ever foolish enough to Google DE-HPS, then you'll be buried in a million websites promising massive gains in efficiencies, power, savings, increased bulb life, and absolutely monstrous plants. But DE systems are expensive, and so are the bulbs. So are they worth it? Well, simply put, yes, they are, but only if A, you can afford it and make the economics make sense, and B, if your facility can handle the outputs in both intensity and heat. However, before we get to the test, what in Thor's hammer is double-ended technology? In the bulb world, there are generally two types of bulb design, single-ended and double-ended. A lot of the simplest bulbs use a double-ended design. This is because all bulbs run a current between a positive and negative electrode of some kind. So a double-ended design allows you to keep the bulb very, very simple. However, double-ended bulbs are quite awkward to use in an application respect, and also they're generally quite fragile. Single-ended bulbs solve this problem by pulling the two end connections within the bulb structure itself, transferring their corresponding inputs and outputs to the base cap. This design gives far greater flexibility in application and therefore the designs the application allows. However, there is of course a cost, namely efficiency losses caused by the additional components, the shadows these components make, and even the slouch caused by gravity. So, the type of application greatly defines what bulb structure can be used, which is why car bulbs look like this and grow bulbs look like this. For indoor growing applications where the environment is relatively stable and there's more need for the improved efficiency of double-ended bulbs than there is the toughness and more flexible single-ended type, it makes sense for someone to come up with a double-ended version of the high-pressure sodium technology. So, in 2005, those clever chaps at Philips launched their double-ended green power bulb with intensity gains of up to 30% and bulb degradation levels as low as 10% after 10,000 hours. Needless to say, the web forums got more than a little bit excited. There are some obvious and not so obvious differences between single-ended and double-ended high-pressure sodium. Firstly, of course, is the appearance. In place of the Edison screw you're used to, there are two wires poking out of either end of the globe. The bulb itself is thinner and much more simple with regards to its internal structural components. The arc tube inside the bulb is both shorter and thinner as it works at a higher frequency, which provides a more stable reaction, which allows both a higher pressure and temperature to exist within the arc tube. The result is, of course, more micromoles, but not just that. Also, DE-HPS emits more reds and blues than its single-ended cousin. Even the globe material itself is different, as double-ended lamps use quartz as opposed to the borosilicate used in single-ended lamps. Even the space within the bulb, that's usually a vacuum in single-ended, is actually filled with nitrogen in double-ended to aid with thermal conductivity. Obviously, weird-looking bulbs require equally weird-looking sockets to fit them in. So, double-ended fixtures come in two types, hood and ballast separates, and the more commercially favoured all-in-one units that are common in greenhouses. And it's these that we're focusing on today. While on the subject of focus, I should also mention that unlike the single-ended MEGATEST on bulbs, we're not ranking these fixtures because that would be absolutely daft, and here's why. Each of these fixtures is, by design, part of a lighting canopy. Think of it like a huge jigsaw puzzle, and we're taking a single piece out to test. Now, as far as I'm aware, all of these fixtures rely on light compounding to a certain degree, so testing them as we are is completely unfair.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
We do it to give you viewers an understanding of the various outputs and strategies each fixture and manufacturer employs, but as to which is best, well, that greatly depends on everything from your ceiling height to your canopy footprint, so if you don't know what you're doing, ask an expert about lighting plans before doing anything else. Light compounding, in horticultural terms, is the practice of hanging multiple fixtures at set distances to create a stable light canopy that eliminates a common problem of high-intensity discharge lighting, hotspots. Due to the intensity of DE-HPS, reflectors play an even more important part in getting light to the plant, as there's an awful lot of it and reflectors have a tendency to create these hotspots. This is greatly lessened with double-ended, as bulb design allows cleaner reflector design, but as you'll also see in our test, if you hang a reflector outside of its designed range, you can easily cook plants. We're looking at fixtures from 5 manufacturers today: Papillon, the Phantom Commercial, the Gavita Pro 1000, the Nanolux DE Commercial, and the PL NXT2. We'll be testing them using our standard 25-point canopy test on our 5 foot by 5 foot grid, but this time at a height of 36 inches instead of the 24 inches for the single-ended tests. As usual, we take 25 samples using our spectrometer and its cosine receptor, add those together and then divide them by the total number of spots on the grid to get the canopy average. New for this test is our intensity map. This is basically where we take the numbers you usually see on the graph and swap them for 10 colour blocks so you can visually see just where the hot spots and low spots on each pattern are. And so the recorded test data for this test includes the 25 measurements on our 5 foot by 5 foot grid from 36 inches this time, the new intensity map, the canopy average, the uniformity ratio, which is the most intense spot on the grid divided by the least intense spot on the grid, the voltage and wattage drawn by the fixture, and the spectrometer's integration time. Also, recorded conditions data includes air temperature inside and outside the tent, the humidity inside and outside the tent, and the air pressure on the day. But before we get to the test, a few words on safety, as if you are new to DE technology, it can be very easy to break a fixture, break a bulb, or incorrectly insert the bulb into the fixture. Installing double-ended bulbs is actually surprisingly easy. Firstly, make sure the sliding retainers are in their open position. Then lower the bulb between the retainers, flat side down, and with the getter facing the ballast end of the fixture, making sure the 2 wires slot into the pinch channels until the bulb pops into the metal spring clips. Then simply slide the retainers closed and you're done. Now, I should mention that some bulbs vary in length a few millimeters depending on the manufacturer, and whilst the bulb should be snugly fitted within the fixture, please don't try and force it, otherwise you'll more than likely break the bulb. Now, while you're doing this, and in fact whenever you're handling bulbs, always wear gloves. This is because nasty acids produced by your skin can actually degrade the quartz due to the shear intensity of the arc tube. Also important is eye protection, especially if you're replacing bulbs on hanging fixtures. Now, during this testing, we noticed that the sliding clips on many fixtures can tend to shave tiny amounts of quartz from the support tabs on either end of the bulb, which is mainly only noticeable under laser light, which is when we first noticed it. Now, after the full test was done, the tent was covered in tiny microsplinters and shards of quartz, too small to do any harm to the touch seemingly. We're pretty sure you wouldn't want this in your eyes or your mouth, so please take the necessary precautions. Finally, time for the results, and we're going to start with the Papillon first. The single most striking feature of the Papillon is its open spread, open-sided reflector that's been specifically designed for the light compounding effect, which is very obvious in our tent, where here you can clearly see the reflector's line of shadow. These fin-shaped elements spread the light far wider than a normal closed reflector, which means that a standalone test in a non-compounding tent like ours is particularly unfair on this type of reflector, so make sure you take that into consideration when comparing these results. One advantage of this open design is that it allows heat to escape much more easily, which is a key advantage due to the intensity put out by DE-HPS. The manufacturers claim that due to the reflector's efficiency, the Papillon is one of the smallest fixtures on the market, a very important consideration in greenhouses where shadows caused by the fixtures can be an issue. The reflector itself is made from higher density Vega aluminium, which the manufacturer claims is both easier to clean and limits reflector degradation to only 1% per annum. Looking at the Papillon's results, it's obvious that our 5x5 footprint is far too small for this type of reflector, but nevertheless the test does reveal lots of intriguing data. Firstly, the even spread of light backs up one of the manufacturer's key claims of eliminating hotspots, and the intensity map clearly shows that the wide lateral spread produced by the open wing design allows these fixtures to be laid out in long, narrow rows. Also, its 2.2 uniformity ratio is very nicely flat across the whole canopy, and as maximum intensity is under 400 micromoles, it suggests it's very feasible to hang this fixture lower than normal without burning your plants. Although, make sure you do know what you're doing before straying outside of any manufacturer's recommendations. Next up in our test is the Phantom Commercial DE, which comes in both open and closed reflector designs. We'd hoped to test both, but sadly the closed reflector wasn't available at the time of the test. The open reflector we have here is similar in design to the Papillons, but the thin elements here are far simpler, and instead of using Vega aluminium, it uses European Hamatone aluminium that's claimed to be 99.85% pure, according to the manufacturer. There are several features that make the Phantom quite interesting. Firstly, you can separate the ballast from the hood and convert it into a two-piece unit, a possible deal maker if that feature is important to you. And secondly, like all the fixtures in the test, the Phantom is dimmable, but unlike all the others, it's a digital dimmer and not a mechanical switch. Just like the Papillon's open reflector, the Phantom's open reflector throws light very high up the tent, meaning it's designed for light compounding in a very similar manner. The similarities don't end there, it also dissipates heat in a very similar manner to the Papillon. However, what is different from the Papillon is the intensity pattern that reflector puts down on the canopy. Whereas the Papillon's was fairly flat and uniform, the aggressive nature of the Phantom sees its wing reflectors throw its intensity way outside the 5x5 canopy, so it's very hard for us to test it. However, just like the Papillon, we can glean some very interesting data. For instance, despite having very similar open-winged reflectors, their strategies differ slightly. The Phantom favours higher average intensity over uniformity, as it has an average of 31 micromoles more across the canopy than the Papillon, but at the cost of its uniformity ratio. Third on our test is the Gavita Pro 1000, which is probably the most well-known fixture in our test, mainly because it was the first 240 volt DE fixture that could run a 400 volt bulb, although it's not the first DE fixture full stop. That came from PL lighting. The Gavita reflector is probably the most copied reflector design in existence, and there are many manufacturers' fixtures that are actually compatible with it. Soon after completing the test, we discovered that Gavita have a couple of new reflectors, one which is a wide open wing design and one designed for low ceilings, and we hope to have these for our next test. Looking at the Gavita's results, you can clearly see the difference between an open and closed style reflector. The Gavita's closed style concentrates most of its intensity towards the centre of the grid, and also gives a micromole boost over the Phantom of around 14 micromoles on average. What wasn't expected was the extremely flat 2.14 uniformity ratio. Now, to give you some perspective on this, if you go back to the single-ended HPS test, you'll see that the uniformity ratios on most of those bulbs was in the range of between 4 to 6, so 2.14 is mind-blowing. The fourth tested fixture is the Nanolux Commercial DE. Now, the first thing you'll notice upon clamping your eyes on the Nanolux is the radically different layout from all the other fixtures in this test. Clearly, this fixture is not designed for greenhouses due to its increased shadow footprint resulting from the ballast being orientated as it is. No, to me this looks like an indoor only fixture. Another unique feature of the Nanolux is the 1200 watt overboost feature, 50 watts more than any of the others. Also unique on the Nanolux is its use of ceramic instead of plastic retainers. They certainly feel much tougher upon initial use than the plastic variety and should be able to take many heat cycles, but that's also their issue. Be very careful to allow them to cool off enough to touch when changing the bulbs. I speak from experience. Looking at the intensity map of the Nanolux, we see a clear centre line bleeding intensity towards the edge of the reflector, suggesting a more squared off lighting plan than the open wing designs. And as you can see, the symmetry is almost an opposite pattern to the open winged Phantom. And finally, onto the PL NXT2. Like the other manufacturers, the PL has several types of reflectors compatible with this commercial grade fixture. The one we're testing today is their beta reflector, which is designed for deep penetration and ceilings above 10 feet in height. The other two are their asymmetrical reflector for end lighting, which stops usable light being wasted on the walls, and their alpha reflector, which is designed for ceilings under 10 feet. Sadly, neither of these reflectors made it to us by the deadline for this video, and so, like the alternative reflectors from the other manufacturers, they'll have to wait for a later test. Now, the first thing you notice about the PL is it's very solid. Now, this is mainly attributable to the iron casing, which acts like a huge heat sink and has been designed for easy access to the ballast electronics while it's hanging up. This form follows function approach to design is evident everywhere. For instance, the PL can't be rested on its ballast end as the others with a similar configuration can, and it doesn't look like it should be able to sit flat on its reflector frame. Certainly not with the heft of this ballast. Now, without the reflector, that is indeed the case, but mounting the reflector reveals an engineering marvel. It balances. With the reflector weighing only a few hundred grams, it's hard to imagine this is by accident. It seems that a great deal of effort was put into making sure this fixture is easy to work on without being taken down. This continues through to the reflector mounting design, which, unlike all the others, doesn't require the bulb to be removed in order to swap the reflector. It even has an integrated spirit level, making it easier to level. And it's little details like this that make my inner geek very happy. Looking at the results, it's clear to see the difference between the more square reflector design used by many manufacturers and this rather odd looking helmet design. The PL's design concentrates a super amount of intensity in this 3x3 grid, and this is one of the reasons that this test is particularly unfair on this beta reflector. This reflector was clearly designed to be hung much higher than 36 inches. And with the extra height, the 3x3 central region would spread out conically across the canopy, adding to its compounding effect. It's claimed that due to the design of the NXT2's beta reflector, in tandem with the PL lighting plan software, that a full plan can be as much as 5 to 15% more efficient, depending on factors such as canopy footprint and ceiling height. Now, considering the PL exhibits a 3.5% advantage in its average canopy over all the others in this test, and as it's so clear that the light compounding effect is such a major part of their strategy, it's certainly within the realms of feasibility that this claim holds water. And if it does, and it allows PL to use less fixtures to create the same light footprint, and when you consider just how much power HID lights consume, 5 to 15% could be a massive saving. Having now looked at these 5 very different approaches to the same lighting technology, we hope to have given you some insight into just how complex this end of the lighting market is. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, it's very application specific, and so there are many aspects to consider in these lighting systems that are not always obvious to the casual observer. And light compounding is the obvious elephant in the room. Do not underestimate its importance. In fact, we think it's so important that I'm working on a plan for a new episode dedicated to investigating the compounding effect, but it will take some time to work out the test, so stay tuned. While we're talking about compounding, we also hope we've shone some light, if you'll excuse the pun, on the various strategies employed by these big manufacturers. Again, it's only a snapshot of information, as testing all of these lights in this manner is very unfair. The test is outside all of their recommended parameters and specifications. So, take this data for what it is and consult professionals before throwing down all your hard-earned dough on anyone's lights. Well, that about wraps it up for this edition of TestLab. Just some reminders before I go. Don't forget to subscribe to the Monster Gardens channel for every episode of TestLab, and look out for the legalese when the music starts grooving. Until next time, thanks for watching TestLab.